All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us here as we log on. And also, I am joining you from Brown Deer, where I just finished up an equipment open house with a number of municipalities from southeastern Wisconsin. So I'm in a guest conference room here and a little grainy. So thanks for bearing with that. But I'm very excited to see that a number of you are joining us live today to hear from Mike Rupiper from the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. Mike has been pretty involved in saltwise for, well, since I started over a year ago, and has also been working on a project. He's going to fill you all the details in the Starkweather Creek watershed on the east side of Madison. So I know that a number of you are joining in from Wisconsin and other folks are joining in from other states. We know the problem of salt pollution in our water is not just a Wisconsin problem. And we all have a lot to learn from one another. So I think we're excited to hear today from Mike and some of the lessons that he's learned on this journey, looking at this one impaired watershed and hoping that, the lessons here can be replicated elsewhere. So please do not hesitate to type any questions that you have into the chat, and I can relay those back to Mike, and we can take those throughout the presentation as well as at the end. So feel free to put a message in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're from, and we welcome you here today. And without further ado, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Rupiper, the Deputy Agency Director and Director of Environmental Resources Planning at the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, or CARPC. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our ongoing work with local partners in the Starkweather Creek watershed to monitor chloride concentrations, identify chloride sources, and implement outreach to reduce salt use. Start by talking a little bit about why oversalting is a concern, give a brief overview of chloride impaired waters, and then go in depth into the chloride management plan that we developed for the Starkweather Creek watershed. There are several reasons to be concerned about excess salt use. Our region and much of the state relies on groundwater for drinking water. Salt levels have been steadily increasing in our groundwater and drinking water in many areas. Excess salt can affect the taste of drinking water, and high sodium levels can be a health concern for some people. High amounts of chloride are toxic to fish, aquatic insects, and amphibians. Chloride can negatively affect the fish and insect community structure, diversity, and productivity, even at lower levels. Road salt can kill plants and trees along the roadside. Plants that take up salty water through the roots can also suffer. Chloride in streams, lakes, and wetlands can harm aquatic vegetation and lead to plant community structure changes. Soil that is laden with salt can lose its ability to retain water and store nutrients, also be more prone to erosion and sediment runoff, which is also a water quality issue. Salt can sicken pets that consume it or lick it off their paws, or drink salty snowmelt or runoff, can also irritate their paw pads. Some fish like finches and house sparrows can die from ingesting de-icing salt, and some salt-sensitive species are particularly at risk. Chloride can also corrode road surfaces and bridges and damage reinforcing rods, increasing maintenance and repair costs for our infrastructure. But this was a nice graphic that was developed by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to illustrate the common sources of salts: road salt, water softeners, fertilizer, manure, dust suppressants, and common impacts on aquatic life and drinking water. Our Starkweather Creek project focuses primarily on de-icers like road salt and surface water impacts. In the Starkweather Creek watershed, the largest sources of chloride are salt from the de-icing of paved surfaces such as roads, parking lots, sidewalks, and driveways. In Wisconsin, the DNR has established a chronic toxicity limit for chloride in surface water of 395 milligrams per liter. Chronic toxicity is a long-term exposure that interferes with growth or reproductive potential. To be listed as an impaired water for chronic toxicity, the maximum chloride levels in the water body over 4 consecutive days must exceed an average of 395 milligrams per liter. Acute toxicity, on the other hand, is a single or short-term exposure that causes death of aquatic life. To be listed as impaired for acute toxicity, the maximum chloride levels in a water body must exceed 757 milligrams per liter, two or more times within a 3-year period. In Wisconsin, the DNR maintains a list of impaired water bodies called the 303D list. There are currently over 40 water bodies in the state that are listed as impaired for chloride pollution. Most of them are in the southeast part of the state, but there are a few throughout the state. In our region, there are currently 4 water bodies listed as chloride impaired. Pheasant Branch Creek over in the Middleton area, the northern section of the Yahara River, upstream of Cherokee Marsh and Lake Mendota, which goes through villages of Windsor and DeForest. Our project area, which is Starkweather Creek, on the northeast side of the city of Madison and drains to Lake Monona. And then down over here, a small pond, Odana Pond, is also on the impaired list. Starkweather Creek has about a 15,500 acre watershed with primarily urban land uses on the northeast side of the city of Madison. It was first listed for chloride impairment in 2016. Starkweather Creek has 2 main tributaries, a west branch and an east branch. They're generally divided by East Washington Avenue, or also known as State Highway 151, if you're familiar with the Madison area. To try to address this chloride impairment in a coordinated way, several key organizations got together and we decided to develop a chloride management plan for Starkweather Creek. The concept was to demonstrate the effectiveness of adopting Wisconsin saltwise practices with a focused effort in a single watershed. The plan has 3 main components. 1, to identify likely salt sources in the Starkweather Creek watershed. 2, to implement best management practices to reduce salt use in the watershed. And 3rd, to monitor chloride levels to track reductions. A project like this depends on the participation of key stakeholders. We're fortunate to have a steering committee that includes the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District, who provides wastewater treatment for much of our region and is a founding member of Wisconsin Saltwise. City of Madison Engineering Department, who manages winter road maintenance and stormwater in the majority of this watershed, and is an active member of Wisconsin Saltwise, developing a certification program for public and private winter maintenance professionals. The Friends of Starkweather Creek, a watershed group that was formed in 2003 that focuses on raising public awareness and appreciation of the creek. Public Health of Madison and Dane County, who has collected water samples in Starkweather Creek since 2008 and also compiles salt monitoring data from across the county in a comprehensive report each year. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, who regulates stormwater and wastewater permits. They're also responsible for monitoring and assessing water bodies for the Clean Water Act's impaired water list. The flagship Truax campus of Madison College is in the Starkweather Creek watershed. Developing their plumbing apprentice training program for the next generation of plumbers offers an opportunity for promoting water softener optimization and efficiency. The Bruce Company is a local landscaping company that also provides snow management services. They have participated in Wisconsin saltwise training and have incorporated reduced salt use into contracts with multiple customers. The headquarters of American Family Insurance is in the northeast portion of the watershed. This company emphasizes stewardship to land and water resources as a component of their corporate responsibility. And they began participating in Wisconsin saltwise training in 2017 and have been an early adopter of saltwise practices. And of course, Wisconsin Saltwise, which began as a coalition of organizations throughout the Dane County region concerned about salt use, and have become a state leader in developing public outreach and applicator trainings to promote proper salt use. This steering committee helped us guide the plan development. Many have an extensive knowledge of salt use practices and reduction efforts, as well as a knowledge of the watershed. Several have been early adopters of saltwise practices, and many are key implementation partners for proper salt use in the watershed. The development of this chloride management plan included three main components. First was a GIS analysis of potentially salted impervious surfaces to help identify primary sources of chlorides in the watershed. Next, we had a volunteer monitoring program to help us identify potential chloride hotspots and also track chloride levels in the creek over time. And third, there's a community engagement component to spread the word about proper salt use. So to start the GIS analysis of potentially salted services, we were looking at basically salted roads, parking lots, driveways, and sidewalks to help us identify priority areas for outreach. So the Starkweather Creek watershed includes about 1,500 acres of pavement. That's parking lots, driveways, and sidewalks at just non-residential and multifamily residential properties. Non-residential and multifamily driveways, parking lots, and sidewalks are the largest potential sources for this watershed. You can see from these charts here, 45% up to 70% of each of these sub-basins of the watershed were potentially salted paved surfaces in non-residential and multifamily properties. So this creates a big opportunity. The City of Madison Engineering Division, in collaboration with Saltwise, has developed a winter salt certification program for private applicators. They've trained over 300 individual applicators since the program started in 2017, but it's estimated that only 30% of the total winter maintenance businesses operating in the city have certified winter maintenance professionals on staff at this point. So this creates a huge opportunity for salt reductions in these non-residential and multifamily properties. The 20 largest parking lots in the East Branch subwatershed, for example, have 174 acres, which is almost 30% of the non-residential and multifamily paved areas in the watershed. So getting the owners and property managers of the 20 largest parking lots in the East Branch to use certified winter maintenance professionals is critical to chloride reduction in this watershed, we believe. Next big component of our chloride management plan is chloride monitoring. Starting in fall of last year, we had about 12 monitoring volunteers, including some of our CARPC staff, a number of members of Friends of Starkweather Creek, as well as interested residents that live in the watershed. We monitored 4 sites, 2 on the West Branch and 2 on the East Branch. Monitoring consisted basically of taking a grab sample, then conducting a conductivity measurement, also taking a chloride measurement using a titrator strip. And then if the levels were near or above the chronic toxicity level, we also had a sample sent in to the lab for analysis. Lab analysis for chlorides was conducted by the Madison-Dane County Public Health Lab. We did this monitoring generally weekly in the winter, more often if there was a salting or melting event, and doing it on consecutive days if we were above the chronic toxicity level. This is some of the monitoring data that we gathered. As I mentioned, we began monitoring in November of 2020. So at this point, we have about a year's worth of data at our 4 sites. We continued monitoring through the summer to get an idea of what base flow conditions were during the summer months. So this is the Melvin Court site, which is up over here. It's the furthest upstream site on the West Branch of Starkweather Creek. So you can see from the data, the baseline summertime averages are still about 100 milligrams per liter. And for this site, the peak reading was 465 milligrams per liter on November 24th of last year. Another site, this is the Fair Oaks location, also on the west branch, but further downstream. Again, baseline levels, 100 milligrams per liter. At this site, a peak reading was 531 milligrams per liter. This happened on February 23rd. Other site, this is Route 30 location, shown here on the map. We see much higher levels on the East Branch in general. Our baseline averages are about twice they are on the West Branch, so about 200 milligrams per liter. And the peak reading for this site was up near 1,300 milligrams per liter. And again, Ivy Street branch, this is located further down here on the East Branch. Again, baseline averages about 200 milligrams per liter, even in the summertime. But our highest readings, about 1,000 milligrams per liter, occurred on February 23rd, like some of the other locations. So a couple of the key findings from our monitoring over the first year. There's consistently higher chloride levels on the East Branch compared to the West Branch. That's helpful information for us because it will allow us to focus more on the East Branch with our outreach activities. Baseline chloride levels in non-winter months indicate a fairly high level of groundwater contamination. We're seeing 100 to 200 milligrams per liter. Half of the chronic levels on the East Branch, even during the summer months. And the highest chloride levels that we saw were actually happened during, I mentioned that February date, that was a very warm period here in Madison. So it was a early spring melt event. So it wasn't actually during the typical salting events themselves during the winter when things are cold and frozen that we had the highest levels, but it was when things start to melt and thaw out and you get more runoff. It's when we saw our peaks from our monitoring. And another key finding was that the Hatch Quantab chloride test strips that we were using to get our chloride measurements, we found were very easy to use for the volunteers and also correlated very well to the lab tests that we had done by City of Madison, Dane County Public Health Department. So we plan on a couple of changes to our monitoring program for this coming season. It's just starting this month, basically, based on what we learned from our first year of monitoring. One is we're going to eliminate the volunteer conductivity monitoring. The conductivity probes were kind of a bit of a pain for volunteers to use. They have to be calibrated every time before you use them. They give you a reading in conductivity, which correlates to chloride, but is not as clear or consistent of a correlation. So the Hatch test strips is really what we're going to rely on going forward, along with the lab samples. We've also made some changes where we now have an app that the volunteers can use to directly enter the data using ArcGIS Survey 123. So that allows us to get real-time updates of the data as it's collected on the website that we're using to track the data. So that's useful for more immediate feedback. And then we're also intending to expand the number of monitoring locations this year. So we're going from 4 sites up to hopefully 9 sites, 5 on the East Branch, because that's where we're seeing most of our chlorides, and we want to try to narrow that down and focus on that area. 3 on the West Branch, and then 1 on the main stem. So this map kind of shows the monitoring locations, we're planning. So we're focused down in this area initially. We're adding 1 downstream, adding quite a few here upstream on the East Branch. Want to take a closer look at, we've got East Town Mall and some of high commercial uses in this part of the watershed that we want to take a look at and try to focus on those areas. Also looking at adding monitoring point upstream of the airport, which is on the West Branch. So another key component of our plan was to conduct a watershed survey. This was an online survey. basically intended to gauge current levels of knowledge and attitudes about salt use. Also gives us a baseline to be able to measure effectiveness of our information and education efforts when we conduct a follow-up survey towards the end of the project. I want to share some of the results of our survey. So there's about 50,000 people in the watershed. We got about 87 responses from our online survey. While that may not seem like a lot, statistically, it's actually enough to give us a plus or minus 10% confidence interval at a 95% confidence level with these results. So I feel like the residential responses we got were pretty good. Most people reported doing their own snow and ice removal in this watershed. This as far as residents. Most residents also reported primarily using de-icer only on sidewalks and walkways. That was encouraging because driveways make up a big percentage of the impervious surface in the residential area. And if people aren't salting them, that's good news. In general, people reported kind of a mix of whether they use de-icer, sand, or a sand salt mixture. The city of Madison provides a free sand salt mixture for residents for pickup at locations throughout the city. So there are a number of residents that take advantage of that. And that is a good way to get residents to use the correct amount of salt because it's already pre-mixed at a good rate. Most residents don't know what's in the de-icer they use, or they are using a chloride compound. So that was interesting information, probably not too surprising though, but an opportunity for education. In the residents that took this survey, the product choice appears to be highly influenced by what they believe is safer for pets and the environment. Again, that's opportunity for education. And what is available free from the city of Madison, as 40% of the respondents made their choice based on that. And also what they feel works best in colder weather. About 60% of our residents reported seeing the correct salt application rates, this image A here, in their neighborhoods. That's a good start, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, with about 23% reporting seeing this image kind of B here, salt use in their neighborhoods. Most residents who took the survey understand that salt is a water quality problem, either strongly or agreeing to that. So that's good news. It's already a good level of base awareness there. Most residents also reported either already minimizing salt use or being very willing to do so. And most residents were also very willing or already using a more expensive non-chloride alternative for de-icing. So again, that's good news from a residential perspective. Many residents also already reported using sand or being very willing to do so. Then on the other side, however, many residents are not willing to stop using salt entirely for de-icing, somewhat willing or not willing, and that's okay. Our focus is to get people to use the right amount of salt and only when needed and when it's most effective. And then there was a question about preference for how to get information, and most residents prefer engagement via social media, email, and websites. So that's being incorporated into some of our outreach activities, which I'll talk about next. So community engagement, saltwise led an effort last January, Salt Awareness Week, put together a number of great social media clips that could be shared on Facebook and Twitter, etc. And our other implementation partners, CARPC and Friends of Starkweather Creek, City, Madison, all helped spread the word on those salt reduction and wise salt use tips. Also, last year, we joined with the City of Madison engineering staff and actually sent a letter to all the largest parking lot property owners about some upcoming salt reduction workshops that Saltwise and the city was holding. It's an effort to get some of those to attend trainings and use certified applicators. It has proved a challenging aspect of our community outreach, though, is trying to get a hold of those property managers and owners of large commercial retail places in particular. And this summer, there's also been quite a bit of community outreach at a number of fairs in the watershed. So Saltwise had Allison at Orton Front Fest share information about Saltwise and salt reduction tips. That was very successful. And the Friends of Starkweather Creek participated with a booth at Eakin Park Fest, also sharing information about the Starkweather Creek project and salt reduction use, among other things. It's very helpful to have those kind of partners out there spreading information about saltwise practices in the watershed. So as far as our planned future activities, this plan was set up to go through basically 2024. So we're doing expanded and increased community engagement. Our goal is to increase primarily the number of private applicators who are trained and certified, as well as increase the number of commercial and multifamily properties who are using certified applicators. So I talked about we're expanding our monitoring program, and the goal of that is to help us identify the problem areas within the watershed that we can then focus our outreach to. And then the watershed survey, we intend to follow up in 2024 with a similar survey to the one that was conducted this past year, which will enable us to measure the differences and show the effectiveness of some of the outreach and education that's been done. So if you'd like to learn more about the project, you can visit our website either through the general CARPC website, or we have a specific ArcGIS hub site set up for this project. This is a QR code. You can actually scan it from this webinar or from the recording, it'll work. So that'll take you to the website for the project where you can read the chloride management plan if you're interested, or you can look at the data that we're collecting is being updated real time, as well as some other information about the project. So I'd like to take a few minutes to acknowledge part of this project was funded by a 2020 DNR River Planning Grant. It's a great project, a great grant program if you're looking at doing water quality projects like this. Also, our steering committee, as I mentioned, they're incredibly valuable to this project, not only helping with the planning and the report, but definitely key partners in implementation and making this happen. And then I want to mention a couple of ways that you can get involved. Obviously, one is to educate yourself about saltwise practices from Wisconsin Saltwise. You can help spread the word about Wisconsin Saltwise through your own communities and networks. And you can get involved in chloride monitoring, either as part of an existing effort like ours or start your own. I want to give a little notice that there are a couple of winter salt certification classes coming up that Saltwise and City of Madison are putting together. Smart salting for Wisconsin roads coming up on November 9th, and smart salting for parking lots and sidewalks on November 10th, which is actually happening at the Garver site in our watershed, because that's a big focus of our project, as I mentioned. And you can find out more information about either of these on the Wisconsin Saltwise website. So with that, I'm happy to take questions either now. You can also contact me via email at this address below, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody who has any questions about the project and our work.
Okay, Mike. Let's see here, trying to navigate and talk into the chat. But I'm back. We do have a couple questions for you that have come in, and others we welcome your questions in on the chat. So it looks like there was one question about just a little bit more background on Starkweather Creek, if it's challenged by other factors, other pollutants other than just chloride. Do you want to speak to that for just a moment?
Yes, Starkweather Creek it's on the impaired list for a number of other pollutants, phosphorus being one, like many water bodies in the Rock River watershed are. And also the West Branch in particular is on the, I don't know if it's officially on the impaired list yet, but it is impaired for PFAS, which you may have heard about, which is a big pollutant affecting the West Branch and downstream into Lake Monona.
Yeah, so definitely chloride is not the only contaminant of concern here, but one that we're focusing on today.
Yeah, I'll add that. I mean, I think from our project perspective, you know, it was really the intent was to focus on a single watershed and a single pollutant. I think if you try to do too much at one time, it just becomes unmanageable and overwhelming. And by taking a focused approach with this plan, specifically on chlorides and specifically in one watershed, we're able to really, you know, focus our efforts. And, you know, then we can obviously, if this is successful, carry it forward to other watersheds that are impaired by chlorides, or to look at other pollutants in the Starkweather Creek watershed.
Yeah, and I do feel like also, I mean, all I'm doing, right, is working on salt, but I feel like we've seen just such incredible successes. So knowing that we are not necessarily that, it's not impossible to, you know, work on the issue of chloride. Not that it's impossible to work on some others, but there is some low-hanging fruit there, and just figuring out the kind of best ways to facilitate the reduction of chloride can be promising and hopeful. I do have another question here though, Mike. Looks like friends of the North Fork of the Shenandoah River are wondering if they could view all of the survey questions from the watershed survey.
Yeah, we have, actually the survey is still live on the website that I talked about, our project website. So you could actually take the survey yourself, even though it's not. And we're going to be closing it out soon. And then all the data and responses from the survey will be on the website as well.
Okay.
But I'm happy to share that with you individually too, if you would like to contact me by email.
Yeah, I can put that. Let's see if I can continue to navigate here. I will put the link to the survey in the chat. All right, and I also put in the link to the upcoming training. So we have both the virtual roads training as well as that in-person parking lots and sidewalks training. So those are the two questions that had come in, Mike. So I think we can give folks a moment here, but someone just said, wonderful, thank you so much, exclamation point. So do appreciate your time today sharing the story of Starkweather Creek, and yeah, just look forward to continuing to work with you. And yeah, hopefully we're, you know, inspiring some others here to take steps as well. All right, I think we can call that. And I will I'm gonna end the stream, Mike. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you for organizing this.
Yes.